this war. But what kind of message does it send to Russia and other European allies when he may say that, but the Pentagon does this thing where it halts this weapons shipment in the name of America First interests?
Christina, look, not happy is meaningless if there's no action behind it. And, you know, to what Colonel Jacobs is pointing out, there's no military justification for this move. This is a purely political decision to try to squeeze Ukraine. And there's a sad irony that today being Independence Day, we're allowing one of our allies to be squeezed and swallowed up by an imperialist nation on its border. I just think President Trump, you know, he has to demonstrate that he cares about Ukraine and that he's willing to move on Putin to put the pressure on. But that's just not happening. Ultimately, we're seeing all the pressure being directed at Ukraine. Ukraine is getting hit harder now by Russia and has been since the beginning of the war. And instead of supporting Ukraine, we're allowing and enabling Russia to continue those strikes. And I think he's just hoping that he gets Ukraine to cry uncle, which they're not going to do. And it's just going to make this war worse and Vladimir Putin more emboldened.
And Colonel, I want to ask you what you make of this being the third time since February that Secretary Hegseth has held up these kinds of aid shipments. Is there anything you'd like to see from Congress? Is there anything Congress can do in terms of holding the Pentagon accountable?
Well, there's plenty the Congress can do, but it's not going to do it. You're going to continue to see these kinds of things from the Defense Department, not particularly well informed and not focused on the real mission, and that is to support Ukraine to defend itself against Russian aggression. You have to keep a couple of things in mind, and that's these. Trump would dearly like to be able to be known as the guy who stopped the war. And he's willing to do just about anything, including having Ukraine have to cede lots of its territory in order to make that happen. The second thing is that Russia would like to take as much Ukrainian territory as possible before there are talks to end the war, which is why you see them increasing their attacks on Kiev and why this halting of weapons in support of Ukraine works to the Russians' advantage and against the interests of the West. At the end of the day, it's kind of interesting to note that on the one hand, President Trump would like to end the war, and on the other hand, Putin would like to continue it. And the irony is that they're both working in concert, ultimately to wind up defeating the interests of both the West and Ukraine, Christina.
Joel, I do want to ask you, though, because especially at the start of their war, there was a shortage of some of these supplies, especially the large, heavy ammunition shells. Between the Russia-Ukraine war, the conflicts in the Middle East, is there any kind of legitimate concern that U.S. stockpiles could, in fact, be running low?
Yeah, of course, there would be if there was an independent assessment saying that's the case, but that's just not what we're hearing. And, you know, our budget coming up this next fiscal year for defense is going to be $1 trillion. Resupply funds are not lacking at all. And of course, the defense industrial base here in the United States has really re-energized itself over the last several years. Certainly, there are always issues we need to watch for. But it's not as if right now the United States, are facing an attack where we're going to need those supplies, and we are able to build them. And I just think to the earlier part of the discussion, there's no military justification for this. This is another attempt to try to squeeze Ukraine. And I think, you know, Christina, the big picture here is that Donald Trump is trying to renew relations with Vladimir Putin, and he wants this Ukraine war to end, and he's willing to, it appears, do anything he can to squeeze it to end so he can get a new relationship with Russia. Just the other day, new sanctions were announced on Iran, not one new sanction on Russia. There's literally no pressure being applied by this administration on Russia to try to get it to the table and agree to the ceasefire that he had proposed and that Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine had already agreed to.
And speaking of Iran, actually, I want to ask, Joel, because you've got these inspectors, IAEA inspectors have not been able to go in essentially since this conflict bubbled up, since Israel launched these military strikes three weeks ago. Now the IAEA is saying it's pulled its last remaining inspectors from Iran. I was asking some folks in Vienna, some ambassadors who've dealt with this nuclear program, if it matters that the IAEA has access, especially about accusations that Iran is hiding things, that they're cheating, and they have all told me unequivocally yes. Can you explain why it matters and what it means diplomatically for the world to no longer have official IAEA access, and what diplomats do now to push back against this nuclear program?
Certainly, the IAEA as an independent body is the one entity that the global community respects for understanding nuclear activities in any said country around the world. And their inspectors are highly qualified, and they have been providing, for example, with Iran, reports to the international community for a number of years. The real linchpin moment, though, prior to these attacks of last month, was that the IAEA itself said that it did not have confidence in Iran's activities, that it believed Iran was hiding information, and it censured Iran for the first time in 2 decades. And that censure had legitimacy, to your question, in the eyes of the European countries who said, the IAEA believes that there's a problem here, so we respect that. We're not just taking the word of the Israelis or the Americans. We have a third-party independent voice. Lacking that now is going to make it harder, not just to verify what Iran does and does not have, but also to build further international support for constraining any Iranian attempt to potentially restart its nuclear program.
Yeah. And Colonel, I'm wondering from a readiness standpoint, how this lack of potential information from these international watchdogs on Iran's nuclear sites could impact military planning.
Well, the best information you could possibly get is from personal inspection on the ground, and IAEA provided that. Without that, without people on the ground that actually see what's going on inside Iran, we're going to have to rely on other intelligence means. And those are remarkably unreliable. You have to have a lot of them. There's a lot of conflicting information that comes out. You have to rely on technology, which sometimes works and sometimes does not. And in the end, we're much better off. Everybody is much better off having IAEA on the ground, and with them not there, our readiness suffers, our danger suffers, and danger around the world suffer. I mean, we know that Iran has worked extremely hard to put together nuclear weapons for more than 40 years. Yes. And because of restraint from the West, the result has been that Iran has managed to do what it has been doing and now will continue to do.
All right, Colonel Jack Jacobs, Joel Rubin, thank you both so much.